Okay, we're in the book of Revelation, chapter 17 again, and we're continuing our study in the book of Revelation. So, chapter 17 of Revelation, before we start, we'll open with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you this day for your blessings. Thank you, Lord, for the opportunity we have to be here in church this morning in the Sunday school hour. Thank you, God, for those that are with us this morning. And Father, thank you for those that are with us, Lord, in church and, Lord, online. We pray, guys, you bless the word of God as it's taught this morning. Help us, Lord, to learn something that will strengthen us, encourage us, and edify us. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, Revelation chapter 17. And last week we talked about, again, the one world church, the one world system, and we were in Genesis chapter 11. So turn to Genesis 11 for just a second, and I've got a little article I want to read you here. It kind of just simply reinforces what I was trying to say last week. But look at Genesis chapter 11. And we looked at Genesis chapter 11 because it's dealing with Babel, which becomes Babylon. And if you look in Genesis chapter 11 here, you have Babel. We looked at that earlier, where the Lord confounds the languages of the people and then separates them. But go back to chapter 10, and look at chapter 10 here. And in chapter 10, verse number 6, chapter 10 is the what they call the Table of Nations. That is, it's a list, or a tablet back in the day, I suppose, of the families of Noah, the children of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and it tells where they settled. And where they settle here is different parts of the world, and pretty much Japheth becomes the European, Ham becomes the African, and then Shem becomes the Asian. And so you've got three distinct races, so to speak, there: black, white, and yellow, right? And then the Indian is the red man, and he's a Shemite. But and then you have Mexicans; they're brown people, and they're sort of, I guess, Southern European, and a mixture of Indian and things like that, or whatever. So we're all a mixed up mess. There's no such thing as a pure race anymore. Unless, I mean, there's certain parts of the world maybe there is, but in America there's no such thing. Let's see, look in Genesis chapter 10 here, look at verse number 1. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. So after the flood, Shem, Ham, and Noah, or Japheth, have children. And he says, verse 2, the sons of Japheth, then he names the sons of Japheth. Then look at verse number 6, and the sons of Ham. And there is the sons of Ham. And then you go down to verse number 20, unto Shem also, the father of the children of Israel, blah, 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 the children of Shem, verse 22, right there. Okay? So he names the offspring, the descendants of these three sons of Noah. Japheth, we call the people from Japheth Japhethites. The Hams, those from Ham are Hamites or Hamitic. Those from Shem are Shemites or Shemitic or Semitic. You've heard of anti-Semitic? That's anti-Shemitic. Anti-Semitic particularly deals with, of course, the Jewish people, whereas Shem himself represents the Asian people. Now look at verse 6 here, the sons of Ham. And the book of Psalms, I think it's 105 and 106, references the land of Ham. And the land of Ham is Egypt. It's the African continent. Verse number 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush and Mizraim and Phut and Canaan. Cush is the old word for Ethiopia. Mizraim is the old word for Egypt. It still is the word for Egypt, by the way. Phut is also Put, P-U-T. That's Libya. And then Canaan is the land of Canaan, which is modern day what they call Palestine, on the where Israel is located, along that Mediterranean coast there. Verse 7, and the sons of Cush, Seba and Havilah and Sabtah and Ramah and Sabteka, and the sons of Ramah, Sheba and Dedan And Cush, okay, the son of Ham, begat Nimrod. And Nimrod's a very important figure in the Bible, and when it comes to false religion, people that stay religion trace what we call false religions, cultic religions, what's known as the mystery religions, to Nimrod and his mother, which was a woman called Semiramis. Verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. So Nimrod becomes basically a mighty, well, verse 9 says he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. So he's a man's man. He's one who, back in these days, if you were a hunter and could handle a sword, a bow and arrow, and things like that, then you would become, the lord of the land, basically, because you would outfight the other people, and you'd make it to the top. And Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And when it says before the Lord there, Nimrod there is not a good character in the Bible. He's a bad character. And so it talks about him being a hunter and a hunter before the Lord and things like that. That kind of carries a negative connotation as far as he's concerned. In other words, he's kind of just a worldly, fleshly, carnal kind of a man. He's not a godly man. Not that hunters aren't godly, but just because of Nimrod himself and the connotation that goes with Nimrod, it's not good. And the idea is that he was a hunter of souls. That is, he's the beginning of much false religion in the world. And so he was a spiritual man in a certain way, I guess religious rather than spiritual. And a lot of the stuff is not in the Bible itself about Nimrod, but you read other outside sources and stuff like that, and they trace everything that has to do with false religions, and particularly what we know as modern-day Catholicism, to these mystery religions of Rome and Greece and other places, Babylon, and all the way back to Nimrod. Nimrod, his mother was Semiramis. Somehow, I'm not exactly sure how this works out, but somehow it turns out in mythology that Nimrod marries his mother Semiramis, and they have a son named Tammuz. And Tammuz is mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 8. And Tammuz is like the Adonis, or Apollo, the sons of the gods and things like that. Now he says here in verse 11, look at verse 10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, which we read about in chapter 11. And Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh. Nineveh becomes the capital of Assyria and the enemy of the Jews. That's in Jonah. And the city of Rehoboth and Calah, so on and so forth. All right, now, so there you have the mention of Nimrod. The beginning of his kingdom is Babel, verse 10, in the land of Shinar. So go to chapter 11, verse 1. The whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. What happens there? Chapter 10, verse number 10. That's the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom, which is Babel, and which is the land of Shinar. So that's what you read about chapter 11, is Nimrod's kingdom here. So Nimrod is a type of the Antichrist, a world ruler. And they have one language. Verse 3, they said one to another, go to, let's make brick. Verse 4, God, and they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower. That city represents the civil government. The tower represents the religious side of it. Whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Verse 5, the Lord comes down. Verse 6, he said the people is one. And then he separates them. And he separates them again by languages. So here's these people up here. They're building the Tower of Babel. As they build the Tower of Babel, then somebody says, hand me that nail. And he hears it as something like, you're a real jerk. And the other guy says, put your finger here so I can hammer this nail in here or whatever, And, hand me that saw, this and that, whatever. And everything comes out different. They don't understand each other. What'd you say? And they can't understand each other because they don't understand what the words. The words are coming out of their mouths differently because now they're speaking different languages. Okay, that's what happens in Genesis chapter 11 here. Now, verse number 9, therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Now, we talked about that. Now, this is really the first ecumenical movement, where everybody gets together and they want to, again, localize everything and everybody in one community, one city, one world government, one world religion, etc. And language brings people together. You got to have the same language. In other words, when you take, for instance, it's true that to have a country, you must have a border, a culture, and a language. Without a border, you can't have a country. Without a culture, you can't have your own nationality. Without the same language, then you can't understand each other. So you have to have one language to understand one another. Or now you've got an application called Babel, I think it is, that you can get where you can translate things, stuff like that. Now, the universal language, how many knows what the universal language of the world is now? What is the universal language of the world right now? It's English. English is the universal language. I met a guy one time when I used to work at the Navy base. He was a black man from Zaire, I think it was, or Zambia, one of those countries there. Zambia or Zaire, one of those two. Anyway, he told me a story. I believe the story. He was innocent. He was unjustly convicted, etc. Blah, blah, blah. He was visiting his family in America, and he got caught up in something that his family was doing that he didn't know about. He was a professing Christian, seemed like a good guy. But in any case, he was serving federal time up there at the prison up there in Millington. And they were doing janitorial work and yard work and grounds and keeping and stuff like that there at the Navy base. Anyway, this guy was taking care of our building. I got talking to him, got a witness to him. He said he was a Christian, gave me a good testimony and stuff like that. And his English was like British English. And he had like a British accent. And his English was just beautiful. And it was perfect. And so when I got talking to him, I said, how do you learn English? And he said, well, he said in Zaire or Zambia, whichever country it is, he said English is the national language of our country. I said, really? He said, yeah. And I said, why is that? He said, because it unites us. And I said, well, how's that? He said, well, he said in our country we have different dialects and things like that. He said, you cross the river and we can kind of understand you. You cross the go around the mountain, we can sort of kind of understand you, and then we cross the next mountain and we can't understand what you're saying. Because there's so many different dialects within our nation. And he says, like Tennessee. He said, Tennessee, and apparently he'd studied about Tennessee. He said, Tennessee has 96 counties, and that was correct. It says 96 counties, so it'd be like if you lived here in this county, and you had your dialect, then you go in the next county, they have a different dialect. But it's close to yours, and you can communicate. But then you go another county or two up, and you can't understand what they're saying because it's a different dialect, and it's just a different county. He said the same thing's true in Africa, all of our African countries like that. And see, so Zaire, or Zambia, whichever one it is, he said, they made English the official language, so we all have to learn English. So we know, he said, I know a couple of dialects, but I don't know 100. But we all study English, therefore we can communicate. So language, you got to have the same language or you can't communicate. You can't have a nation without one language. You got to be able to communicate one another. Here in Genesis 11, they have one language. And the people are one because they have one language now. Let me just read this article here. This is by Dave Hunt. If you get any books by Dave Hunt, I recommend them. I think he's a good author. I think he's scripturally sound, doctrinally sound, and he writes a lot of stuff on prophecy. He's dead now, but he wrote a lot of good stuff. And here's an article he wrote here. It said, it should be quite clear to any observer of news and trends that we are heading, as the Bible foretells, for a world government and a world religion, and that the two will be united. Gone will be any separation between church and state. It should be equally clear that a basic requirement of the world religion, steps towards which are rewarded by what's called the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion, will be that it must be inoffensive and universally accepted. So he says here, for the basic requirement for a world religion is it must be inoffensive and universally accepted. Political and religious correctness is essential to the false unity desired by this world. Spirituality without truth will be the rule. The world will have returned to Babel, where the city, that is the secular government, and the tower, that is the religion, were united. Genesis 11:4, let us build us a city, there's the secular government, and a tower, there's the religion, whose top may reach unto heaven. Those who persist in the claim that some teachings are wrong will be silenced for the good of society. Hence, we have the truth ministry now imposed on us by the current administration. Those who persist in the claim that some teachings are wrong will be silenced for the good of society. That trend is already reflected by TBN's Paul Crouch. Remember, you know what TBN is? That TV station you know who Paul Crouch is? I think he died. But he was on there. He's the guy that started that. He was a millionaire who had the money to do these things. And he was a charismatic kind of guy as far as his doctrine was concerned. And here's what he said one time. That trend is already reflected by TBN's Paul Crouch, whose prayer demands immunity from correction. So he's going to quote a prayer here that he prayed, Paul Crouch, on his TBN station. And this prayer demands immunity from correction. Here's what he says, quote, God, we proclaim death to anything or anyone that would lift a hand against this ministry. And so he would call people that, he would designate people who called him out on his false doctrines and things like that. He would call them heretic hunters. You're just looking for heretics, you know. You want to burn them at the stake. No, we don't. But you're calling for our death if we correct you. We're not calling for you to die. But he's calling for us to die, apparently, here. Such unity, fully realized at Babel, appeals to human wisdom. God's response, however, was to confound the language of all the earth and to scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. At Mars Hill, Paul explained God's purpose in so doing. Acts 17:26-27, looking at last week. God hath determined before the bounds of their habitation that they should seek the Lord. So God put people in certain places, in certain areas, certain locations, so they could seek the Lord. Of course, everything is mixed up right now, especially America is a melting pot. At least it used to be a melting pot. Melting pot means everything melts together and becomes one. Part of our, on our dollar bill or coin or something, it says something in Latin which means out of many one. Well, e pluribus unum, right? E pluribus unum. You heard that, right? That means out of many, one. And so you have all these people coming across to America, leaving Europe, particularly, and then many people, of course, against the will, came from Africa. And out of many, we become one. And that's what we're supposed to be. But then again, we've had our troubles over the years with different immigration cycles and things like that. When the Irish came over here, nobody liked the Irish. Now they run, the Northeast. And part of the problem was their Catholicism. The Italians came over at one time. People didn't like the Italians either. And a lot of it had to do with their religion, their Catholicism. Because America, up to that point, was mostly Protestant. And they didn't like the incursion of the Catholic Church coming into America. Let's see, there was talking about people and different things and language and stuff. I probably told you a story before, but I got a friend of mine. He was in the Navy back in the 60s, and he got a ticket so he could go, throughout all the different countries of Europe and stuff. And he started off in Germany, where he was stationed, and he got on the train, and they went over into France. And he said the trip from Germany to France was just pleasant, quiet. All the Germans sitting around reading their newspapers, and minding their own business. And he said then they got crossed into France, and all the Frenchmen got on there. And he said everybody just started hollering and yelling and screaming and yelling and hollering, blah, 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 blah. And they were not quiet, and they were not pleasant, this and that, whatever. They were just disruptive. And he said the Germans that were in that car where they came into and sat down, the Germans, he said, just simply got up quietly and walked and left and went to another car. They didn't like the French. That'd be like us saying we don't like the Mississippians or Arkansans or whatever. They're just totally different, have different language. The across the river. We don't like those people from Arkansas. They have a different personality, different culture, different way of doing things. They're too loud, they're obnoxious. And we're just kind of quiet and want to mind our own business, just y'all be quiet. See? That's what it would be like, and that's what it's like in Europe. So how do you get all these people together? I mean, blacks and whites can't get together. Mexicans and blacks can't get together. When I was in high school, we had blacks, whites, Mexicans, and Portuguese. We called them geese. They were the dairy farmers. But anyway, there's large Portuguese people out there, settlement, whatever. So anyway, you'd be friends with these people. Black, white, Mexican, Portuguese. And then if you're walking through high school, you'll be walking through, and then you'll see the blacks all ganged up, huddled over here. You walk by and you see your black friend, you look at him, and he doesn't even recognize you. Because he'd get in trouble if he did. Because he's not supposed to be friendly with a white guy. And then you walk by on the Mexican side, and the Mexicans, they're doing all they're doing, and then you see your Mexican friend, he ignores you too, because he's with the group. The Portuguese, pretty much, they were more white than they were. They're like people of color, whatever. So anyway, individually we got along, but as groups we did not get along. And if you were with your group, it was tribalism basically. So I mean, how do we get along? I don't know. You got to grow up and understand that we're all Americans and that we're all fairly decently good people for the most part. And we need to get along with each other. And so, anyway, so how is everybody going to the truth of the matter is, you don't get along with some of your own family members. Right? I mean, there's a lot of people out that, there is no, what do you call it, what's the word I'm trying to think of, monolithic, group of people. I mean, you can't lump all the Indians together. There's all kinds of tribes of Indians. We know from history they didn't get along. They would kill each other and scalp each other and maraud and rape one another and capture each other and enslave each other and stuff like that. So it wasn't one group of, all you got to do is read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, that book. And you'll find out that the Indians were not just one monolithic group of people that got along with each other. They did not. They killed one another. Why? Because people are sinners and people they'll take advantage of you if they can, unless there's a rule of law that we go by. That's why we got to have a Bible, because the Bible gives us the rule of law, basically, how to live, how to cooperate, how to get along with people, and things like that. And if you don't get along, then you're going to have problems. And so the Antichrist is going to somehow bring all these people together. And the way you bring everybody together is you basically have to brainwash everybody, program everybody, and those who don't fit the program, you got to put in the concentration camp or silence them or whatever it is, so that they don't cause trouble. And so that's the way it's going to be. And we see a lot of that stuff in dictatorships, and we see even in America some of those things even happening now to some degree. Instead of seeking the Lord, which God's purpose was for them to seek God, that's why He separated them. Instead of seeking the Lord, man has sought to become the Lord of the universe. His inventive genius has fulfilled God's pronouncements that, quote, the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, Genesis 8:21, and has proven the accuracy of God's dire warning that nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do, Genesis 11, verse 9. The world has grown more wicked and violent with the increase in man's education, knowledge, and technology. Truly, we are a generation of nuclear giants, but moral midgets. That's a quote, I think, from General Douglas MacArthur, I think, in World War II, end of World War II. And now, in rebellion against God's judgment at Babel, man is determined to unite the world as it was then. Lockheed Corporation, this is probably a 20 or 30-year-old article. Lockheed Corporation has boasted in a Scientific American ad that through its computers, it was undoing the Babel effect by uniting the world in one language once again. IBM and other scientific corporations have made similar boasts. It is imagined that to unite the world would put an end to competition and conflict between nations and usher in a golden era of peace and prosperity. In fact, it will bring the reign of Antichrist and the wrath of God poured out upon this earth. So that's his comments on this stuff here. So what the world thinks is positive many times is negative. And so even now, just thinking about this here, and I don't want to, but you think about this Twitter deal going on, where Elon Musk has bought it out. The nation of Great Britain has already warned him that if he's not careful, that they'll have to shut Twitter off in Great Britain and much of Europe if he doesn't abide by the rules. Well, apparently the rules are against free speech. Apparently that's what it is. And so we can't speak our minds as we'd like to do. We know that when you say certain things, on Facebook, or post certain things on Facebook where they're doing that kind of thing. Now, you take out in the real world, not the Facebook world, but the real world, I mean, we talk about all kinds of stuff, say all kinds of stuff, whatever. We offend other people and things like that, all the time. But in this world here of social media, it's a fantasy world, it's a dream world. It's not a real world. But they're trying to make the real world. They're trying to put that template on the real world, basically, to basically chill our speech. So we can't preach the truth. And again, this one world religion is not going to tolerate anything that is opposed to it. Now, look at Revelation chapter 17. We won't be able to get into this today, but I'll just read you a little bit here. Look at Revelation chapter 17, and verse 5 talks about this particular woman is Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And she's a religious woman. She's a religious woman. Her colors are scarlet and purple. They're in verse number 3 and verse number 4. Precious gold and stones and pearls. She has on her a golden cup in her hand. And that speaks of the old Babylonian culture. And it also speaks of the Roman culture, which was their colors. And the Roman Catholic Church basically adopted the Roman setup. So you have pagan Rome under the Caesars, and then after Constantine becomes emperor, he legalizes Christianity, then pagan Rome transforms into what we call papal Rome. Papal meaning the Pope. Okay? And so when you look here at Revelation chapter 17, look at verse 6. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Okay, so if he looks out there and he sees the Roman emperors, which they did, persecuting the church, look at the next part. When I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. Now, he's not wondering with great admiration in the sense of, wow, isn't she awesome? But he's looking at it in the sense of, I can't believe what I'm seeing here. I can't believe this woman is persecuting the saints of God. Well, if it's pagan Rome, why would he wonder about that? Because it's transformed into papal Rome, historically. And papal Rome looks Christian. Supposed to be Christian. So now if you look at it from that standpoint, then he's looking at a religious church that is killing saints, and he's like, what's the deal? Why are they doing that for? Because they look like they're religiously Christian. That's the prophecy. Verse 6, and I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said to me, wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. And then later on, he tells you in verse 9, this woman sits on 7 hills, and she is a great city that rules over the earth. So at that time it's Rome, and when Antichrist rises to power, it'll be over a revived Roman Empire. Okay? Now look at Revelation chapter 14. Revelation chapter 14, and look at verse number 9. Verse number 9. And this is in reference to verse 8. Babylon, the false, that great city which rules the earth here, which is an economic power and a religious power. Verse 9, the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image, there's the Antichrist, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the saints will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of holy angels in the presence of God, a Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Verse 12. Here is the patience of the saints. And in chapter 17, he said in verse number 6, this woman is drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Verse 12 here, he says in chapter 14, here's the patience of the saints. Here's our perseverance, our endurance. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. In other words, they keep the commandments of God, they keep the faith of Christ, and they don't take the mark and they don't worship the beast in the tribulation period. Verse number 13, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Right, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord. These are the martyrs. From henceforth, yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. So you have in the tribulation period, you have under this new revived Roman Empire, the economic and the religious. You have you don't have separation of church and state. You've got church and state joined together now. And so to bring unity, you've got to belong to that church. If you don't belong to that church, you're a heretic. If you don't worship the beast, then you're a heretic. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to suffer death for your heresy. What's your heresy going to be? You keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus Christ. And you don't bow to the Antichrist because you know he's the devil incarnate. All right? Now, if this is speaking of the future, prophetically it is, this church has got to be somewhere out there. And again, it has to do with Babylon. And if you've read the book Two Hislop, or read or even just looked through the book called The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop, he shows you where all these mystery religions were, where they came from, and how they all developed, and how they're all similar. And there's a lot of similarities between them and Roman Catholicism. Because Roman Catholicism is not truly a Christian church. Okay? Now, I'm going to read you something here, and I'll read you some more stuff later. But this is out of Fox's Book of Martyrs. How many's ever heard of Fox's Book of Martyrs? How many have a copy of Fox's Book of Martyrs? Okay, you should have a copy of that book. This book was written by a guy named Fox, and it was written probably, I guess, in the 1800s, I think, 1700s, I forget when. But here I'm just going to read you just a short little introduction here, and then at some point I'm going to read you some actual accounts of people who did not submit. The people that didn't submit to Catholicism in the Dark Ages, the similar scenes you're going to see in the tribulation of those that don't submit to the Antichrist. Pope Clement VIII sent missionaries into the valleys of the Piedmont. The Piedmont is northwest Italy. It borders Switzerland on the north and France on the west. And there was a lot of activity going on there at this time. There was a lot of Protestants that were holed up in the mountains and the valleys of the Piedmont area in northwest Italy. And they did that because that's where they lived. That's also because that's where they were trying to defend themselves against the Catholics. Pope Clement VIII sent missionaries into the valleys of the Piedmont to induce Protestants to renounce their religion. And these missionaries, having erected monasteries in several parts of the valleys, became exceedingly troublesome to those of the Reformed. The Reformed are those who are the Reformers, or people of Reformed faith that came out of the Catholic Church. Martin Luther started the Reformation. These are people who came out of the Catholic Church. They're called Reformers. Let's see, they were exceedingly troublesome to those of the Reformed where the monasteries appeared, not only as fortresses to curb, but as sanctuaries for all to fly to, as had any ways injured them. The Protestants petitioned the Duke of Savoy, which is a region there, against these missionaries, whose insolence and ill usage were become intolerable. But instead of getting any redress or any satisfaction from their Duke here, the interest of the missionaries so far prevailed that the Duke published a decree. This is the state publishing a decree about religion, in which he declared that one witness should be sufficient in a court of law against a Protestant, and that any witness who convicted a Protestant of any crime whatever should be entitled to 100 crowns. So if you are one witness and you can try to accuse a Protestant of something and get a court or a judge to agree with it, then you get money for that, for turning them in. It may be easily imagined upon the publication of a decree of this nature that many Protestants fell martyrs to perjury and avarice. Perjury means lying under oath. Avarice means the greed for money from those who would want to turn them in. For several villainous papists, how many knows what a papist is? Follower of papal Rome. It's Roman Catholic. For several villainous papists would swear anything against the Protestants for the sake of the reward, and then fly to their own priest for absolution from their false oaths. Did you get that? They're going to turn a Protestant in, lie about it, turn a Protestant in to get their money, and then they'll go to the confession and confess to the priest that, yeah, I lied about that Protestant to get some money. And the priest will say, okay, say 10 Hail Marys and a couple of Our Fathers, I think it'd be cool. If any Roman Catholic of more conscience than the rest blamed these fellows for their atrocious crimes, they themselves were in danger of being informed against and punished as favorers of heretics. Because a Protestant's a heretic, whether he's a good person or not. The missionaries did all they could to get the books of the Protestants into their hands in order to burn them. So they wanted all the books that the Protestants possessed, the Catholics did. They wanted to gather them all so they could burn them. When the Protestants, doing their utmost endeavors to conceal their books, the missionaries wrote to the Duke of Savoy, the Catholic missionaries wrote to the Duke, who for the heinous crime of not surrendering their Bibles, prayer books, and religious treatises, sent a number of troops to be quartered on them. These military gentry did great mischief in the houses of the Protestants and destroyed such quantities of provisions that many families were thereby ruined. So they came and burnt their houses, burnt their books, burnt their Bibles and all this other stuff, because that was heresy to have a Bible. To encourage, as much as possible, the apostasy of the Protestants, that is, to encourage the Protestants to leave Protestantism and become a Catholic, the Duke of Savoy published a proclamation wherein he said, "To encourage the heretics to turn Catholics, it is our will and pleasure, and we do hereby expressly command, that all such as shall embrace the Holy Roman Catholic faith shall enjoy an exemption from all and every tax for the space of 5 years, commencing from the day of their conversion." So if you convert to Catholicism, you ain't got to pay tax for the next 5 years. The Duke of Savoy likewise established a court called the Council of Extirpating the Heretics. To extirpate means to basically exterminate them. So here's the church, here's the state and the church together, working together in cahoots against the heretics. This court was to enter into inquiries concerning the ancient privileges of the Protestant churches and the decrees which had been, from time to time, made in favor of the Protestants. But the investigation of these things was carried on with the most manifest partiality. Old charters were wrested to a wrong sense. Sophistry was used to pervert the meaning of everything which tended to favor the Reformed. As if these severities were not sufficient, the Duke soon after published another edict in which he strictly commanded that no Protestant should act as a schoolmaster or tutor, either in public or private, or dare to teach any art, science, or language, directly or indirectly, to persons of any persuasion whatsoever. So if you're a Protestant, you can't teach, you can't work, you can't do anything. If you become a Catholic, you can work. This edict was immediately followed by another, which decreed that no Protestant should hold any place of profit, trust, or honor. And to wind up the whole, the certain token of an approaching persecution came forth in a final edict, by which it was positively ordered that all Protestants should diligently attend Mass. So here's an edict put out by the government: you must attend Mass, even if you are a Protestant. The publication of an edict containing such an injunction may be compared to unfurling the bloody flag, for murder and rapine was sure to follow. One of the first objects that attracted the notice of the Papists was Mr. Sebastian Basin, a zealous Protestant who was seized by the missionaries, confined, tormented for 15 months, and then burnt. Previous to the persecution, the missionaries employed kidnappers to steal away the Protestants' children, that they might privately be brought up as Roman Catholics. But now they took away the children by open force, and if they met with any resistance, they murdered their parents. Does this sound like Baptists to you? Baptists don't do that. Methodists don't do that. Who does that? The Roman Catholic Church did that. To give greater vigor to the persecution, the Duke of Savoy called a general assembly of the Roman Catholic nobility and gentry when a solemn edict was published against the Reformed, that is the Protestants, containing many heads and including several reasons for extirpating the Protestants, among which were the following. Okay, so here's the reasons as a Protestant you can be extirpated. That means brought up on charges and executed and gotten rid of. Here's the things here that will get you in trouble. Here's the reasons for getting rid of Protestants. Here's the reasons we need to get rid of the Protestants. Number one, for the preservation of the papal authority, because they're opposed to the papacy. Number two, that the church livings may be all under one mode of government, church and state. To make a union among all parties, to bring everybody together. We got to get rid of the Protestants. To honor the saints and of the ceremonies of the Church of Rome. Why? Because the Protestants were opposed to it and preached against it. This severe edict was followed by a most cruel order published on January 25th, AD 1655, under the Duke's sanction by Andrew Gestaldo, Doctor of Civil Laws. This order set forth, quote, that every head of a family, with the individuals of that family, of the Reformed religion, of what rank, degree, or condition soever, none excepted, inhabiting and possessing estates in, and then he names these places in northwest Italy, should within 3 days after the publication of this withdraw and depart, and be withdrawn out of the said places, and translated into the places and limits tolerated by His Highness during His pleasure. Particularly, he names some places. In other words, he says, after this edict is put out, all Protestants must leave these areas and go to this place that we're going to basically ban you to. Leave all your possessions and everything behind and go start over new someplace else. And all this to be done on pain of death and confiscation of house and goods, unless within the limited time they turn Roman Catholics. So if you don't move out, then you have a certain amount of time to turn Roman Catholic. If not, we're going to take everything you own and we are going to execute you. So anyway, that's what's going on here. And then we're going to look at some other things here, actually some specifics, all named here and what happened to them because they opposed the Roman Catholic Church. And that is really a preview of people living in the tribulation period under Antichrist. It's going to be repeated in that period of time. Okay, we're going to stop here. It's 11 o'clock. So we'll take about another 5 or 6 minute break and we'll start church in just a few minutes, okay? Father in heaven, we thank you this day for your blessings. We pray, God, you might, Lord, help us in this next hour. Bless those that have come and those that are on their way. We pray, God, you might give us a good service that might honor and glorify you. And, Lord, edify and encourage the saints of God. In Jesus' name we ask. Amen.